I am not going to approach my experience in using the electronic shutter with both Sony and Canon cameras from a technical point of view, but from a practical one. I shoot media for a local high school and have covered performing arts events for 19 years and sporting events for 8. At the beginning of that time period, I mostly use DSLRs. My interest in photography equipment has always been to try and focus on value. There are many offerings, and we live in a time where a person has a lot of different options. One thing I've never liked about photography forums and photography in general is the ego and the fighting that sometimes occurs between the fanboys because of different brands. I believe you can get excellent results from any brand, and I have the experience of having shot Canon, and mainly with the EF full-frame lenses. And then as the years went by, I had a need where a DSLR wasn't meeting my needs. And the situation was when covering performing arts, I would be running a video camera on a tripod and then attempting to use a DSLR and take some pictures of the event as well, both from a wide view as well as close-ups. The big problem with that is the sound of the shutter, and it was ruining the video. And so the students and my other teachers would say, boy, it's a nice video, except for those continuous clicks whenever you take a picture. What really became apparent was the benefit of having an electronic shutter being completely silent, so I could run my video. And at the time, I focused in getting a couple of pair of Sony A6300s. They have a microphone jack, and so I experimented doing video with those as well as just taking pictures. Then with my coverage of sports, and then with the winter sports with volleyball and basketball, and performing those photographic duties in a gym required having f2.8 lenses. I never wanted to pay the prices that Canon and Sony wanted for their models, and so I gravitated to using the options from the Sigma 7200. The first time I had a regular version, but since have purchased the sport version. And for a number of years, I used that lens as well as the A6300 in covering basketball and volleyball, and it served my needs very well. As camera technology and features have been offered through the years, we went through a period of time, didn't we, where it was the megapixel wars. And then it was IQ, and then when video became so popular, people wanted to have cameras that were more hybrid and offered those opportunities. And now the big push is to be able to have a 4K camera that is 60p and with no crop. So you can get those features. With the silent shutter, and I'd shoot in the auditorium, one thing that became apparent was the difficulty that sometimes occurred with mixed lighting. And so with the 6300, I could shoot with the electronic shutter. I didn't have really issues that ruined any of the pictures with rolling shutter. But I found that whenever the tech crew turned on the spotlight, then there was significant banding, and those pictures were unusable. So I went to the practice of, the majority of the time, shooting with electronic shutter, and then whenever the spotlight was turned on, a performer, then I would turn it to mechanical. Well, as technology has changed, the speed of frames per second has become something that seems to be a feature that is being promoted by the different camera companies. And now we're getting speeds of 20 frames, 30, and now even 40 frames a second. There's some that are even higher. For me, in shooting sports, I always have been a shooter who used anticipation. And so I never cared about having the 11 frames a second that some of the A6300 bodies could do. I tended to shoot more at a lower range and even on the lower continuous range on the Canon 70D. I eventually bought a 90D for more megapixels and perhaps a little bit better image quality, and used those also in shooting sports, both in the field as well as in the gymnasium. Because of technology pushing the frames per second, I was kind of interested in getting the R7. Now, when I would use these same lenses between the two different systems, I always got better performance as far as accuracy and sharpness by using even an EF mount lens on these Sony bodies. And I was particularly happy with the performance of the A6600. I'd shoot a variety of field sports, and what I used with that was the Sigma 150 to 600. I only used it for field sports that were in the day, but I also used it for softball and baseball. And then I have a version that is a 100 to 400 that I tended to use for softball and for tennis. But what I found is that, you know, I always got a little bit of better performance as far as autofocus by using the EF mount lenses with the Sony bodies. However, after shooting with the R7, what I can say is there's many things that I like about this camera, and I like it every bit as much as I do my A6600. And of course, this is a better camera in a number of ways, just because of its video features, its 2 card slots, you know, etc. And I found myself when shooting lacrosse and a little bit of the daytime JV games for football, that my autofocus performance was every bit as good between the two cameras. So I was completely happy. And being able to just have the equipment be able to keep up with my composition and the flow of the action. But when basketball season came, I decided to take one night, and by that time, I'd also bought the R10. So one night I decided to shoot 3 basketball games, a JV and varsity boys game, and then a varsity girls game, and only use the silent shutter. What I found out with these 2 cameras, as well as this concern with the Sonys as well, is that with the electronic shutter, moving the camera quickly in order to follow the action, and also the speed of both all those basketball games, that I decided by reviewing the pictures that I consider that using an electronic shutter for sports, at least with these models, is unusable. At the end of this video, I will provide you with a number of samples from those games and showing the difference between mechanical and electronic shutter. And in particular with these Canon bodies, as I researched it a little bit more, what I came to realize is that one factor that while companies are promoting electronic shutter and these very high burst rates for frame, that they're not necessarily letting people know the limitations of using it just because of the CMOS sensor readout. And that turns out to be critical. So there's limitations in using the electronic shutter just because of that and the effects of rolling shutter. And with sports, what it does is warp your images. And in particular with basketball, it's very noticeable where the ball isn't even round at all. And so I decided I'm not going to do that again. Well, I shot just with mechanical shutter, and of course their performance is just fine, as well as shooting close-ups while the drill team was doing one of their routines and moving very briskly. So the IQ is great. So I would use it either way. So I'm going to include a chart also at the end of the video comparing the sensor readout speed of a number of camera models. So what I do with prime lenses is I'm able to map with Sony bodies my 2 favorite things. And so with the A9, for example, I can take the C1 where I've decided to put it, and then you can have one button, focus, so that you can pull up your crop mode or APS-C. So I can take my one single focal length for the prime lens, and I have my choice of shooting it full frame or in the crop mode. And that has become my preferred method. So by just pushing one button, I immediately go between the two. The other thing is I can focus and change the AEL button. And what I've done is with the Sony body, with this one, you can have two focus areas mapped so that I can toggle with one button push between two zones. So I can have zone and I can have center spot or a single point, whatever I want, and I can toggle between those two. So in following the action, I can leave it in zone, push of a button, I immediately, following it without bringing the camera down and going through the menu at all, can toggle to the other focus area. Same thing between the two focal lengths. And I haven't been able to do that with a Canon body, and so it's my style of shooting. And for me, that's a big deal, and I would like them to make their cameras more customizable so that we could have some of these features on it. So that's kind of my experience in shooting the two. I'm grateful for all the technology that different companies have put out, and in trying to capture all these moments of these students and recognizing their performance and their accomplishments. And enjoy reviewing some of these pictures that I've taken with the silent shutter, and be aware of its limitations. And then perhaps also, as you look into the future in purchasing cameras for covering sports, to be aware of the critical nature of the sensor speed and how that affects image quality and the stability of the image. Thanks.